Please welcome to the stage David L. Calhoun, President and CEO of the Boeing Company, and Luis Gallego, CEO of International Airlines Group, for a conversation with Bloomberg's Guy Johnson.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the panel that's going to give you the view of the world from 30,000 feet. We did this panel last year, and the subject then was getting us back into the air. This year, we're back in the air. So now we're back in the air. Where are we going? And will our bags be there when we get there? I'm joined by Luis Gallego. He is, of course, the CEO of IAG, the owner of Iberia, the owner of British Airways, the owner of Aer Lingus. I could go on. And, of course, Dave Calhoun, the CEO of the Boeing Company. Luis, let me start with you. We are back. We are flying. It is fantastic. Everybody wants to go somewhere. They want to go anywhere. Mm-hmm. Demand is very, very strong. How sustainable is that demand?
Good morning, everyone, first of all. I think it's a very good question, and it's a question that we still don't have the answer. So what we see is that we have a very strong pent-up demand. The summer, what we see is numbers that, to be honest, we didn't expect. But also when we see the bookings for the rest of the year and the holiday periods, like Christmas, for example, we still see a high demand and a high number of bookings. So we consider that can be maintained in the future. But we need to see. We don't know how it's going to be the behavior of the customer after the COVID. We think there is a change because people in general, we want to travel. I think after 2 years that we couldn't do almost anything, we have realized that to travel is one of the experiences that we want to have in this life. And we think it's going to continue in the long term.
Dave, we don't have a demand problem. We do have a supply problem. It's everywhere. Yeah. How long is it going to last? When is it going to be fixed?
Yeah, it's the shift from a void in demand to now supply issues, to me, is remarkable, the speed with which it happened. But we've experienced what Luis described pretty much with all of our customers everywhere in the world. The supply constraints start with the operator. So the ability to get enough people to handle maintenance, handle the lines, keep airplanes in the air, pilots to fly them, et cetera. So that has dampened the supply side and created some constraints that's so far been well documented here in the US. We've had cancellations each and every weekend, et cetera. And then that flows straight through to Boeing and the manufacturing side. We have a big, complicated supply chain with a lot of fragility built into it. And it's always been this way. And so finding those supply constraints and dealing with them when they appear has been a real issue. It's been a real issue for both manufacturers and will probably stay that way, in my view, almost through the end of next year. And the biggest constraint of all for that mid-tier set of suppliers and sub-tier set of suppliers is labor availability.
Yep.
Do we have a workforce that can do this?
Luis, Dave talks about what is happening. He talks about what is happening around the world. It is everywhere, this supply shortage that we're having. And as Dave says, people are really at the heart of it. What's your view? When do you think it's going to be fixed? As Dave says, the news cycle is full of these stories day in, day out. I joked at the beginning about, is my bag going to get there? It is a genuine question I think a lot of passengers are asking themselves at the moment. How much visibility do you have? When are we going to get supply and demand back into balance?
I think that we have a different situation depending on the different regions in the world, different airports. And in our case, for example, in International Airlines Group, we have several airlines, and the situation that we have in Spain is not the same situation that we have in UK or the situation we have in Ireland. So during the COVID, we needed to do things to survive. And we had, for example, in Spain, a furlough scheme that was very good, and we could maintain all the employment there. And because of that, the ramp-up is easier, because the people, they were prepared to fly. And then they are flying, for example, in Iberia, close to 90% of the capacity they were flying in 2019, with a punctuality close to 90%. So they are not suffering. You can have punctual problems, but in general, operation is very good. But you have, for example, the case of British Airways in London, where we needed to remove 10,000 people because we didn't have any other alternative. We didn't have a furlough scheme like the one we had in Spain. So now we almost stopped the machinery, and now we need to come back and we need to hire people, but in a difficult labor market, because now the pool of people that they are ready to work is smaller. To hire people, for example, to work in the airport, we need a referencing process that can take 100 days, so it doesn't help. So I think we are competing to have people on the ground. We don't have a shortage of pilots, for example, like in other places in the world, like in the US. Our problem is the ground people to attend the aircraft. So I think we have stabilized the operation for the summer. We have reduced the schedule, for example, in the case of British Airways. The idea is to offer to the customer a stable operation for the summer, and then after that to improve the punctuality. And I think at the end of the year, we will have, again, the machinery in order.
So end of the year?
I think so. That's the objective we have.
Okay. Dave, the big question everybody's certainly asking themselves in the States is, do we need a recession to fix the problem? Do we need to bring down demand aggressively? The Fed is tightening rates, 75 bips a clip. It clearly wants to slow the economy down. Whether it can deliver a soft landing or whether or not it delivers a hard landing remains to be seen. But they clearly want to slow demand down. Is that what you think is going to be required to bring this supply-demand balance back into kilter?
Yeah, like in Luis's answer to the question, of course, it's not going to affect all industries equally. In the areas and the skills where we compete with other industries, software development, data analytics, computational work, the answer is it probably will help. In some ways, the bubble that seems to want to burst in the growth world in the US has already been felt by our teams with respect to interest levels and staffing up and doing the things that we have to do. But it's unique to those skills.
Right.
And so I won't be championing a recession talk. On the other hand, I have no doubt that some slowdown of some sort will be helpful and will create the stability that we need to then start to respond to the demand in aviation, which still is significant.
Luis, if demand comes down, but it takes a while for the supply side to come back and fuel prices stay high, isn't there a danger that we end up, it's going to be, you'll feel it in the middle of the P&L, that we end up with actually costs suddenly exceeding demand? How are you going to manage that balance between those two?
It's a very good question, and I think in aviation in general we are used to handle with crisis because we always have one. So I think that we have the ability to adjust the capacity to the demand. I think we have flexibility, for example, with the number of aircraft. During the pandemic, we stopped the 747s, the 340-600 in the case of Iberia. Now we have new deliveries for the following years. But we can adjust the capacity to the demand. Also, for example, I think the configuration that we have in the aircraft now is better for this summer because what we see is a strong premium leisure demand. And it's something that the configuration that we have right now is better for this type of demand that we are experiencing now. So I think it's going to be tough the following months. We need to see what happens with the Ukraine situation, with the fuel price. For us, it's very important in 2019 was 26% of our cost, the fuel price. The good thing is now we have a hedge position above 70% for the rest of the year. But it's true that for 2023 is only 25%.
Right.
So we need to see the evolution. But yes, what we need to the art of all this is to maintain the cost and to adapt the capacity to the demand. But I think we know how to do it, and we did it in the past.
I was talking to Scott Kirby of United a couple of days ago, just down the road, and he was saying that he now believes that where jet fuel is now, and for those that don't know, it's basically doubled. Where jet fuel is now his base case. He thinks it stays at these kinds of elevated levels. Is that consistent with your thinking?
In our projections, we consider next year is going to be a little lower, but we don't know. We don't have a crystal ball. So what we do always is to be prepared for the worst, and then if the environment is better, we will have better numbers. But I think to have high fuel doesn't mean that you cannot be profitable. And we see in the history of aviation periods of high fuel price where airlines, they were profitable. I think it's also...
assume high fares.
Yes, and also assumes a level playing field. I think depending how your competitors are hedged, how you can transfer in some way the cost to the price.
If fuel prices stay where they are now, Dave, what does that mean for aircraft demand?
I believe there are two things working on aircraft demand. One is the efficiency of the airplane itself, and I think Luis handled that well so far with price elasticity demonstrating what it is. I think they can maintain more margins at this kind of level. I think the other, which means that the demand scenario for airplanes will continue at the pace it is. I think the other subject that now is becoming as important as the efficiency of an airplane are the emissions of an airplane.
Absolutely.
And sustainability today, the emphasis on it, I don't think it's going to change. I think it's going to get even more severe. We're going to have to meet that demand. Every new airplane, if it replaces or displaces an old airplane, is roughly 20 to 40% more efficient and therefore less emissions than the airplane it replaced. So that in and of itself is one of the biggest and most important levers for the industry to get ahead of emissions. And there are many more, including sustainable aviation fuel and other things. But when we think about fleet planning today, it's almost becoming equal parts efficiency and emissions. And the pressures are going to get more severe, probably not less.
I hear what you're saying on that argument, and I hear it a lot. The problem is, though, that if demand continues and in aggregate demand for travel grows, if demand for travel is growing at 20% and aircraft are becoming 20% more efficient, you're not really getting anywhere. If demand increases by 30% and aircraft emissions increase, and efficiency sort of improves by 20%, you're actually going backwards.
Yeah.
So are we on the right course? Are we on the right track right now? Because you've got a total volume of CO2 produced. Each individual flight may be more efficient, but in aggregate, we're not.
Well, it's all about the displacement. So in other words, there's a current rate of displacement today. For every 2 airplanes an airline buys, they replace 1. And the other one is to handle growth.
Yep.
Right? So if you increase and recapitalize that base in any way, and I believe incentives would be required to do it, you will increase the displacement rate. If you do that, you will bring emissions down. And then the second part of this one is sustainable aviation fuel, which in our case, in 2030, every airplane that we deliver will be capable of 100% sustainable aviation fuel. So something other than jet aviation fuel that we know today. And that is where the biggest improvement will be felt and will come. Again, it depends on displacement rates. You have to replace old with new. Anyway, those 2 factors are, in my view, very different than the last 4 decades. A simple fact that emissions is going to become as important. And I think a lot of policy incentives and a lot of policies are going to have to get written around the world to make sure that that happens.
Yeah, the industry is buying every molecule of sustainable aviation fuel it can right now. We have a feedstock issue, we have an availability issue. Luis, kerosene, though, jet fuel is really expensive. We've already discussed the fact that it has almost doubled. The spread between jet fuel and SAF, therefore, has narrowed significantly. How does that affect you guys have made some big bets on making sure that you can make this transfer work. We live in a time of turbulence right now, but as you see kerosene prices coming up, as jet fuel comes up, that spread narrows. Let me get those words out. How does that affect the timeline? Does it accelerate it? Are you changing your thinking? How are you thinking about that transfer right now?
In IAG, we define a roadmap to arrive in 2050 to net zero emissions, and we were the first group of airlines worldwide to do that. And also, we have the commitment that in 2030, 10% of our flights will be powered by sustainable aviation fuel. So we are buying now all the sustainable aviation fuel that is available in the market. And as you say, it's not enough. So what we are...
So you would buy more if it was ready now, you would buy more?
Yes, I think it's something that is good to do, because in the long term, unless we have more plants producing sustainable aviation fuel, we are not going to have enough for everybody. So we are investing a lot of money to try to develop sustainable aviation fuel for our necessities in the future. So I think that what is important is that the governments, they put in place policies to invest in new plants of sustainable aviation fuel. I think, for example, that in Europe, if we want to achieve the objective of the 10% of sustainable aviation fuel in 2030, we need around 30 plants. So what we think is that if we want to arrive to that objective, instead of putting taxes to the fuel in some way, what we need to incentivize is the investment in plants and investment in SAF. And for example, we see that what is happening in the States, I think they are doing very well. They are incentivizing the production of SAF, and is the way at the end to arrive to the objectives that we have.
Okay, I'm going to go to some questions on the floor. We've only got 4 minutes left. Cargo kept this industry going during the downturn. We're now seeing a significantly increased demand for cargo freighters. Dave, what does that demand look like right now? How big a shift is there pre-pandemic to post-pandemic in terms of demand for freighters?
Well, demand for freighters, I mean, it didn't get impacted at all over the pandemic, which is a remarkable, fact. And beyond that, many of the cargo holds in passenger airplanes were filled and flew with very few passengers during this period. So we had an overall very significant increase. Yeah, and we see that demand continuing for quite some time. So our own view is that demand for cargo airplanes specifically, and for the capability to carry cargo on passenger airplanes, that's a differentiator with respect to airplane types. So we'll continue to want to play to that, and I view it as, again, a supplement to demand if you compare it to the couple of decades before the pandemic, and probably one that'll continue for a long time.
Luis, outlook on cargo?
Yes, we don't have freighters in IAG, but during the pandemic, I think cargo was one of the business that performed very, very well, and I think they continue in that direction. The thing is, as we are recovering the passengers, we have less, in some way, less space for the cargo. Also, during the pandemic, you could fly an aircraft wherever you wanted. Now, the schedule is directed because you have passengers that they want to go from one place to the other, and then in that aircraft we put cargo in the belly. But for us, I think it's going to be a business that is going to continue helping in the future, but we are not going to have the same number of cargo-only flights that we had during the pandemic.
It takes us to kind of what are airplanes going to look like in the future. We've talked about demand, we've talked about sustainable aviation fuel, we've talked about what is going to power the future of flight. Dave, how different do aircraft look, not now, but in 20, 30 years' time? You're in a long cycle business. Are we we going to stick with the kind of the tube and wing model that we currently have? Are aircraft going to look significantly different? It does, in some ways, come back to the sort of freight story as well. What kind of planes are we going to be flying on?
Yeah, I think if you go out 20 or 30 years, which is probably the right way to think about it, because airplane lives last 50 years, typically. I think it's going to just be, it's all about sustainability. Anything and everything we can bring to an airplane to increase its sustainable footprint, that'll be a differentiator if we go out that far. And so I think for our company, that's how we think about it. It's not strictly efficiency. I do think it'll still look like the tube and wing you described, but with a lot of digital tools that allow for optimization of flights, more integration with all, the management systems on the ground, a total commitment to sustainable aviation fuel and hopefully an industry and a feedstock system that supports it. All of those factors together and sort of a seal of approval that this is a sustainable airplane for the long term, that will be a bigger differentiator than our historic process of more efficiency based on a more efficient engine.
Yeah. Gentlemen, oh, sorry, Luis.
No, I was going to say that also in our road plan to net zero emissions, we consider that the new technologies and hydrogen will be key. We don't know what's going to happen in 30 years, but we are sure that maybe in the next 20 years we will have hydrogen aircraft flying with, but a small aircraft. I think the wide body, you know better than me, but it's going to take more time to have a solution.
Hydrogen and electric, they're coming, without a doubt. It's just the time frame to 2050. It'll probably affect much smaller airplanes on those two fronts. And then someday, maybe in that next second half of the century, we can get there in the big ones.
They're coming, we're going. Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed. We greatly appreciate it. Dave Calhoun, Luis Gallego, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Guy.
Thank you.